For now, we want to bring in One America's Jennifer Franco to help us better understand where we stand, at least for the time being. Jennifer, thank you for joining us once again. You've kind of been our impeachment guru for the time being.
Yeah.
So last time we talked to you, the defense did not yet take the stand, but there was a hiccup last night regarding John Bolton and the New York Times report regarding excerpts from his upcoming book. What have you learned regarding that response, primarily from the White House for now?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, it's been a pretty divisive, partisan response to that. President Trump took to Twitter, his usual means of communicating with Americans, and basically said that he never told John Bolton to tie up that military aid to Ukraine in exchange for investigations into his political rivals, including the Bidens. And that's something that he even said while welcoming Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House. He was outside of the White House doing a photo op, and he said the exact same thing. And that's also what we're seeing his defense sort of press on the Senate floor right now as this trial is on their second day of arguments for the defense side. They're ultimately stressing the point that Democrats are flawed in pointing to this as a means of potentially pressuring those moderate Republicans to side with the Democrats in terms of calling witnesses later on this week. So that's sort of where we're at right now.
And, just for our viewers, too, I want to point out a little bit of a discrepancy between the New York Times article and some of the allegations that are being made by Democrats. For example, in the New York Times article, John Bolton claims that the aid was being held until Ukrainian officials turned over all materials that they had about Russia investigations that related to Mr. Biden and supporters of Mrs. Clinton in Ukraine. Now, I think that is notable because that is a little bit of a different claim that's being made by Democrats, which is the announcement of an investigation. Because if there is an actual investigation being taken, part of that is the fact that Joe Biden could be exonerated. They could find him to be innocent. A lot of Democrats, by the way, are saying that if there was just merely an announcement, it would just kind of cast this cloud over Biden. So I think that is a discrepancy that I want to bring up as we move on to the president's defense team. They, of course, took their stand on Saturday. A lot of our viewers may have missed it because if you're watching that on a Saturday, ooh.
And we need to talk about your social life.
Yeah, we need to find you guys hobbies or something like that. But we all gather here at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, as we do. Jen, what are the takeaways from the defense team's arguments so far?
Yeah, so far, like what I was mentioning earlier, and just to pick back up there, they're focusing a lot on where the House and the House Democrats went wrong when they had the ball in their court before they handed it over to the Senate. And what we're hearing a lot from the president's legal defense team is that ultimately it was up to the Senate to make sure that they gathered all of the evidence by, summoning those documents, making sure that witnesses were called to testify. And so they're saying that the Democrats' argument that the president obstructed Congress by ignoring these subpoenas is flawed because they're saying ultimately those subpoenas weren't properly enforced. They're saying that the Democrats didn't go through the courts like they were supposed to because they knew that the process was going to get drawn out and because they wanted it done so quickly, and they were sort of trying to tamper this down to like a very short timeline. It's really their fault. And so now they're accusing House Democrats of ultimately denying the president's due process, the same due process that was allotted in the last two impeachments, Bill Clinton being the most recent, of course. And we're also seeing from a lot of the Republican senators and even the House lawmakers ultimately making that same case. We heard from Senator Lindsey Graham saying that even though this leak is out there, he's actually interested. He sort of drew a comparison to the whistleblower complaint, saying that it's a lot of speculation. No one's actually seen it. It's a very small number of people in the White House that have purportedly reviewed this manuscript. So he's actually interested in taking a look to see what's in there for himself.
Right, and as Jay Sekulow said at the beginning of today's arguments, I said we'd recap it tomorrow, but we did start earlier, and he said, for example, that they only go off of sureties. This is, for example, a leaked part of a document. It hasn't been followed up on. We've already heard President Trump deny it, so there's nothing to really necessarily corroborate the claims that John Bolton is making. And a lot of people saying, too, that it could just be about book sales. And to the point that you were saying right there about some of the president's supporters saying that Congress isn't going through the right means, that's what Jonathan Turley, the expert witness, said during the impeachment inquiry, saying that if they're not following the right proper court procedures, going through the legal process and allowing the courts to decide this, then essentially it's Congress that is the one that's obstructing this process because they're not allowing the separate branches to kind of do their part in this process. So I think that's an interesting point that you bring up as well. But of course, there are lingering questions as to what comes next. I mean, the president's team said that they wanted to wrap this up somewhat soon. We got this new bombshell, as they call it, last night coming from John Bolton. What should we be looking for next in this process?
Yeah, so the president's team will be finishing up their arguments for today. They have about 8 hours today, and then they have another 8 hours allotted to them tomorrow. Whether they actually run out the clock, we'll have to wait and see. After that, they are going to move on to this next phase of the process, and that ultimately comes down to the 16 hours allotted to senators to ask both sides questions, and they're written questions, some of those fun rules that have been imposed that, they have to basically write down their questions, submit them through Chief Justice John Roberts, and he reads them aloud. And after that, we did hear from Republican Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming saying that he thinks by Friday is when that votes on whether witnesses are going to be called. That's going to take place. And that, again, is where the spotlight goes back to those 4 to 5 moderate Republican senators, the Mitt Romney, Murkowski, Collins, to see where they vote, to see if they actually break ranks with their party and vote with the Democrats to see about those witnesses, because ultimately we have to remember we have the Iowa caucuses starting on February 3rd, State of the Union, February 4th. So Republicans and the president want a quick trial. They want to finish this up before it gets to that. If witnesses get called, if that vote does pass, this trial is going to go on longer.
And Jen, before I let you go too, do we have any kind of time frame of when this should be wrapped up for, or is it kind of too early to tell?
Kind of early to tell, but a lot of Republican senators think that it'll happen by the first week of February, if that, and that's what they're hoping for. President Trump, it says he trusts his legal team to do that, and his legal team has basically been in lockstep with Senate Republicans on that. So we could see it happen fairly soon, but again, it really just depends on where that vote to call witnesses ends up falling.
Yeah, and as you said, there's a lot of other things coming up too over the next couple of weeks. Iowa caucuses, State of the Union. We're going to make you earn that paycheck a lot over the next couple of weeks, but for the time being, we really appreciate that. That's what I'm saying. We appreciate you coming on today, though, and kind of at least giving us the guideline for what we can expect moving forward. Jennifer Franco, thank you very much.
Thank you.